Hello and welcome to episode 204 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. This week, in honor of the upcoming total eclipse of the sun, it's Solar Week here on the show. Don't worry, the moon won't get in the way of our many great stories on solar this week.
I, for one, welcome our new moon overlords who will soon eclipse the sun. Airbus has a new electric air taxi that is quieter than a hairdryer, which makes me wonder, why are hairdryers so damn loud?
Well, you can go to Costco and spend $500 on a Tyson, I guess. They have big hair dryers. A group of investors are proposing a submarine transmission line between North America and Europe to share renewable energy. This is not to be confused with electric submarines, which operate, to my best of my understanding, on really long extension cords.
Home storage batteries in Germany now amount to 6 gigawatts of grid power for the country. This is roughly equal to the amount of pumped hydro in the country, or the amount of energy required to cook bratwurst at Oktoberfest.
All that and more on this edition of the Clean Energy Show. And also this week, how grids may be able to accept 30% more power on transmission lines without changing anything physical. India changes its tariff rules for EVs and so much more.
So last week we were talking about the Oscars, and you were making fun of me for, chastising Christopher Nolan and sort of criticizing, Oppenheimer. It was okay. But it reminded me there was a news story a few weeks ago. Christopher Nolan was taking a Peloton class. Did you hear this?
No.
Yeah. So Peloton, the exercise machines that are connected to the internet, and they have an instructor on the video that, leads the class, and the instructor, there's music usually, and one of the pieces of music was from the Tenet soundtrack, and the instructor felt obliged to say how much she hated the movie. There was Christopher Nolan taking this Peloton class, having to listen to the instructor, comment about how much she hated this movie.
So I guess you're not alone.
I'm not alone. And, he just won all the Oscars. He made all the money. So, I'm sure he doesn't mind if we say anything negative about his movies.
So I'm kind of depressed and kind of sad about my home province of Saskatchewan, Canada, where we're podcasting from this week. There's this Association of Rural Municipalities. This is basically the umbrella organization that covers all the rural governments, basically. We call them RMs here, rural municipalities, not counties.
Yeah, and we have a very large province physically, but there's only kind of 2 or 3 main cities, and there's a lot of areas with, small towns and farms.
Well, they had a conference, their annual conference recently, and the right-wing government goes there and kowtows to them, and apparently they're not, appeasing them enough because they want more right-wing. The rural part of this province is taking the government in a more right-wing direction. And, people are not getting educated well. They're all on Facebook in the rural places. They're, sharing all kinds of misinformation and racism and all kinds of good things that make me want to move. And, I heard a clip today driving home from the gym about them voicing concerns about education. Like, they're making little Marxists out of our kids. This is, Southern U.S. Style of insanity. And then some of them, of course, run for office and get elected because they do. And, if you're going to vote for the right-wing government, you're going to vote for whatever crazy in your riding is there, especially in some places. Well, I've got a clip of what they think of climate change. They all but deny it.
There was one resolution on carbon dioxide, and that's in reference to the net zero emissions policy that the regulations, I suppose, that the federal government has imposed on provinces like Saskatchewan. Members voted in favor of that actually 95% in favor to go to the province and to get the province to tell the federal government, we don't actually want that. We don't want a net zero policy. We're not sure what that means. We don't know why the federal government is targeting the oil and gas sector as much as they are as the agriculture too. And
yeah, well, the oil and gas sector is not part of rural Saskatchewan, but they have to stand up for it. They're more likely to benefit in offices in London and other places where the head offices are. There's some small oil companies around here that are actually not getting affected by anything. The federal government actually isn't doing anything to harm the oil industry here. If you're looking at Canada from the outside, you might say that our federal government is not doing a damn thing, and yet locally it's like, you know, Satan, because they don't want, because they approve clean energy. That means they're against our local boys in the oil industry, and we don't want that. And of course, they get lots of support with misinformation and crap like that.
Well, the thing I always like to point out is, because we talked about this a lot in Alberta next door, because of they're complaining about all the clean energy policies as well. But even they are planning to have a clean grid by 2050. And if they truly believed that all of this was nonsense, they would be saying clean grid never, which is apparently what this Rural Municipality Association is saying.
Yeah, on the one hand, they say, oh, shucks, we don't understand it. We don't want to have it. And then they come back and say, well, we're meeting all these goals for net zero in this way and this way and this way. And it's crap. And, you know, they had a speaker there from the U of S that apparently said the temperatures weren't changing. So they brought in, you know, some guy to say it's not so bad. And that, you know, sure, there's droughts, but they last for 10 years sometimes here. And of course, we've had the dirty 30s, which we call them, which was the Dust Bowl in the States, where, you know, it was a drought for 10 years. And it's true. That's not completely false, but they are going to get worse. And they just can't bring themselves to understand that, and can't, you know, they start calling it carbon dioxide and saying that it's not a bad thing. It's just something we breathe out. So I don't, if I had an opportunity to move, I think I've had it with this place. I'm not retired like you. If I had the opportunity to make money, I think I would go out there and make money somewhere for a little while, and you know, and I wouldn't do it here. But it's cheap to live here. But I am telling you, man, the smart people move away, and what's left? It's you and I. We're holding the place up.
Wait a minute. Are you implying that we're not the smart people?
Well, we're not the smartest people. We're not building bridges. We're not, you know. But it just seems like there's not anything left. So why would anyone want to do business here? This is something that Ontario is advertising now, even though they've kind of been in lockstep with our provincial premiers, even though they don't have oil there. They're saying, hey, we've got one of the cleanest grids. Come do business here. Well, you can't say that about where we live at all. I mean, they do say it. My friend Jay, our friend Jay, does voiceovers saying that nonsense.
Right. Jay.
Yeah, Jay the sellout. The man will do anything for a buck. Such a, such a guy. Okay, so last week we talked about funeral stories. So I was searching something about not funeral stories, cemetery stories with solar on them. We did a great story, and there's 40,000 views on social media of that interesting story you had last week. Well, I saw there's other stories. There's solar panels are seen as an innovative option for tackling neglected cemeteries. This is in Hawaii. There's a neglected cemetery that's really neglected. I can't show you the picture over a podcast, but it's really neglected. And they want to put up solar panels to bring in some money so they can fix it up. So that's one approach. And another is one in Bellevue, Illinois. A downstate cemetery is at the center of a controversy after plans to turn part of it into a solar farm. This is kind of adjacent to it, and they don't want the solar farm adjacent to it to bring in money. Apparently somebody bought the cemetery. You can buy a cemetery in the United States. Capitalist society all the way. What'd you buy? I've just bought a cemetery. Oh, good investment. I thought it was funny. And breaking news. It's not really breaking news by the time you listen to this podcast, but Rivian R1S and R1T owners can now charge the Tesla Supercharger networks. That's good news for them, but it comes before me and my Chevy Bolt and us as GM buyers, which came on board after Ford. Well, it's not going in the order that happened. And there's a lot more Chevys out there than there are Rivians at the moment. But
yeah, but the Tesla network's starting to open up to non-Teslas here in North America, and that's great news.
All right, Brian, I wanted to talk about this group of investors that want to import energy from the United States under a plan for a transatlantic power cable. We've talked about underwater cables going from Morocco to Europe.
Yep.
And that's happening. So you're going to have wind and mostly solar, and it's going to go to a place that has less of it, far away, hundreds of kilometers. And also Singapore to Australia, which is actually wind, although they have a lot of solar down there. A lot of it's going to be the wind power that's going to Singapore, because you can't, there's no room in Singapore. It's a city-state to put up a lot of wind. Certainly they could put up some rooftop solar, but per capita, it wouldn't be very much. The cables would stretch roughly 3,500 miles across the ocean, reaching depths of up to 11,000 feet and carrying power roughly equivalent to several nuclear power stations. A group of London investors and energy consultants are behind the ambitious scheme, as they claim technological advances in subsea cables would allow them to create a global intercontinental grid, which sounds like a good idea on the surface, but we'll get to the pros and cons later. Once completed, the scheme is expected to deliver about 3.6 gigawatts. That's about 3.6 nuclear reactors, roughly, or 3. And, the sun is shining in North America when it's not in Europe, and then vice versa. So that seems like, if this was cheap and easy, that would solve all of our problems right there, right? We wouldn't need anything but solar and wind, or actually solar, when you think about it.
Yeah, if all the grids were interconnected, because that always helps, but, typically they're just interconnected nearby. But something massive like this, be amazing if they can do it.
So he says the prospect of global electricity grids will solve the problem of intermittency among renewables, as you could shift power from areas that are short of solar or wind. According to one person, there are no longer technical barriers to prevent this. So China, he says, the person quoted in the story says they have a 3,000 kilometer links since 2018. At double the voltage that we're doing, he says. So yeah, their online or on land high-speed DC transmission lines are twice the voltage. So I guess they're going to run it at a lower voltage. However, running a cable across the Atlantic Ocean would be the world's longest and most challenging project today, and there would be some financial and regulatory hurdles. But the cost of this project would be about 20 billion pounds, but potentially cheaper than the 46 billion pounds spent on Hinkley C, Britain's new nuclear power station, which is a lot of billions when you think about it.
Yeah, 20 billion, that's expensive, but apparently cheaper than other power projects.
And remember, this is 3 nuclear plants worth of electricity going back and forth. But somebody I follow on Twitter, Och Hoekstra, a clean energy Twitter guy, said on Twitter, HVDC developments are impressive with more and more long-distance projects. However, we might one day see superconductive cables and other game changers coming. This superconductive cable, I was trying to research that, and I think it's like a liquid nitrogen goes through the line to cool it, so that it conducts more or something like that?
Yeah, so superconducting often requires very, very cold temperatures, although, it is cold already at the bottom of the ocean, I would think.
Yeah, you'd think that would help it. Superconducting power transmission cables use almost no losses. So the principle of the materials is to use a almost zero transmission loss with low temperature liquid nitrogen. One superconducting cable can transmit the same amount of power as 4 to 6 conventional cables, but that's another story. That's a possibility one day that we might be able to do that. Batteries, says Och Hoekstra, and power to X, or P2X, that's power to anything. So excess power to, say, charging EVs at a certain time, or, we're like a smart grid. We've got extra power, so all EVs that we send a message out to will start charging and use up that power, or creating, hydrogen or something like that, some sort of desalination. That's what P2X means. So batteries and P2X are developing even faster and will make them less important are profitable, these undersea cables would be less important or less profitable. So interesting stuff, but maybe not necessary.
No, and of course, there is already a transatlantic communication cable that was put in, I don't know, a couple of decades ago.
Yeah.
And even that seemed impossible. Like, that just seemed crazy.
It does seem crazy, but we've had telegraph cables. I was reading the history of telegraph cables under transcontinental oceans, and yeah, it's quite fascinating. I think the first one only worked for a day or so, but they knew it could work after that. After that, they knew it could work, so it was very cool. And they said, you know, we'll just got to fix it and make them better and more robust.
Yeah, well, it seems crazy, but, you know, if the communication cable was possible, then probably this is possible as well. So Airbus, I like to check in with electric aircraft every once in a while, and we're getting closer and closer to electric air taxis, which is basically what the first electric aircraft are going to be, meaning short distance. So Airbus has one. It's a 50-mile range vertical takeoff and landing electric craft. It can only carry 4 people, but pretty quiet. As we were talking about off the top of the show, apparently quieter than a hairdryer. So this is, you know, it'll cruise at speeds of 120 kilometers an hour, or about 75 miles an hour, only 50-mile range, but, you know, for short taxi-like flights. But yeah, that just surprised me that the decibel levels were not that bad, because we've all heard, you know, small drones buzzing around. Someone's got a camera on a drone, and those things are always surprisingly loud. So you'd think that these very large aircraft are going to be a lot louder, but apparently not. And usually, yeah, they're vertical takeoff and landing. So the wings and the propellers point straight up when you're taking off. And then as you're flying at speed, they level out to propel you forward, and it's even quieter when you're going forward. It's at the landing that's the most noisy.
Yeah, because you're using the wings as for part of the lift when you're going forward. They are like big drones in a way, because they have a series of smaller propellers on them. And I don't know. It's you're right though. Hair dryers are pretty noisy. They are.
I don't know. I don't get it. Why are they so loud?
I don't know, but, you know, making them less loud would be a good idea. I think it's because, you know, the bathrooms, you're in a small place with lots of tiles and hard surfaces.
The acoustics are usually amplifying, yeah.
Well, it's interesting. There's a lot of companies making these type of aircraft, not just Airbus. And I guess whoever makes the automated one that's safe, I mean, that's the idea, right, is to make them automated so that there's no pilot.
They could be autonomous for sure, and possibly easier to make them autonomous, more easy than cars.
Yeah, you just go up in the air, don't hit anything, and land again. There's no traffic rules. There's other than, you know, go from here to here. They are doing that in China too. I've seen people take test flights. You know, just consumers, just average people take test flights, and I'd be kind of scared to do that. So now what we're going to do for much of the show, Brian, is catch up on solar news, because I've been working on a video for our other channels, and this is an ongoing long video, and I was going through solar news on PV Magazine. PV stands for photovoltaics. That is what solar panels that produce electricity are called, and there's a magazine for the industry, and I just was flipping through just the last couple months of stories, because there's a lot of stories. And every once in a while I would say, hey, I wish we'd covered that. So I just made a list, and I'm going to go through it fairly quickly, because there's a lot of interesting little things going on here. I'm going to start with this. This is researchers from China and the UK have improved the atom optimization algorithm to achieve better results in dust detection on PV panels and estimate the economic benefit of cleaning them. Basically, the algorithm detects on different things based on weather and what the sun should be producing on your panels, and says, hey, it's time to clean them, and then you end up saving money and getting more electricity.
Yeah, and of course, up until now, we've known that, sure, if your panel is dusty, but that it's going to produce less power. But what we haven't known is, you know, is it worth it to clean them? Because often the cleaning can cost more than the power you're going to make. But that's brilliant, an algorithm that tells you, hey, it's time to clean them.
And, you know, we've said it before, there's robots that do them, little robots that climb along and do the cleaning for you. Why not? It's a Roomba with a mission. It doesn't go in a random direction. Yeah. They go on straight up and down and back and forth. Here's the next one. Sunwind releases a vertical PV kit with anti-theft structure. This is for putting solar panels on fences, which is interesting because I've got a big lawn fence facing south.
Yeah.
Against a field. I mean, you've got a neighbor on the other side of yours.
Yeah, no, I have a big fence at the back too, but it's be all in cloud and shade most of the day because of the trees and the other houses around.
But there are many applications, especially industrial applications, where this would be an interesting idea. So they're selling the structure for the fence and then having the panels that mount onto them. And they're big panels, long stretches. They look like they're at least 6 feet long, almost like a fence panel that you would get, like the PVC ones, the plasticky ones from Home Depot. So that's interesting. There's an interesting potential there because there's a lot of fences in the world, and that's a lot of power, especially when you're up north where we are, and that south-facing vertical panel might be interesting. Actually, east-west might be interesting. Why not have all three? If you've got a fence that goes in all directions, you could ostensibly have a mixture of directions for your solar panels to get a mix throughout the day.
Talked about that before. You could have, 2/3 of your panels facing east and west and the others just facing straight south, and that might be a good mix.
This does not take up any land. This is it's like rooftop. It doesn't take up any more space. So
yeah, if the fence is already there, might as well put solar panels on it.
Okay, so I've heard about this for a long time, but I actually haven't seen any application like that yet. But it's interesting, and as solar becomes more popular, they're going to start doing weirder things like this, more unusual things, less obvious things, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and as the price of the panels continues to drop.
And the next story is Native American tribes to back a 1 to 3 gigawatt of renewables to replace hydro dams. I found that interesting.
Yeah.
Because most people don't retire the hydro dams, but they want to. The Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative has the ultimate goal of restoring salmon, steelhead, and other native fish populations in the river basin. And they're going to breach 4 dams. This is unusual. This is something I thought would happen later on. It's happening now because they want their fish back, and so they're going to replace the dams with solar. Very interesting story. That's in the Pacific Northwest.
Well, hydro is, of course, clean energy, but it's not always the best option and can disrupt wildlife and landscapes and humans. But keeping the existing hydro running has usually made sense, but there will come a time when solar, wind, and batteries are cheaper than even just running the existing hydro.
And finally, before we get back to your next story, AEG is launching a 23.3 efficient ABC solar panel with, get this, a 40-year warranty.
Wow.
I mean, you think 25 is that's the kind of like the standard. And yeah, it's a limited warranty. It's not, I can't, 40 years. I mean, climate change could be solved by then, and you wouldn't have to replace the damn solar panel. The 40-year in-power output is guaranteed to be, get this, no less than 83.4% of the nominal power output at 40 years.
That's great.
My mind is blowing. You can't see this if you're listening, but on YouTube, I'm doing the mind exploding thing. I just can't get over that. That's something.
Yeah, solar panels, like batteries, they don't keep their entire capacity through their whole lifetimes. But yeah, they'll last often decades, batteries or solar panels. But, you're not going to have the full capacity. But yeah, a guarantee of 83.4% after 40 years.
Incredible. And that makes it cheaper. If they're not that much more expensive, then your cost per kilowatt hour that you're going to get out of them is going to be even lower if that's the case. So, yeah, it's crazy. It's inconceivable. I mean, where will I be in 40 years, Brian? I'll be under a solar panel in a cemetery, hopefully somewhere. That's where I'll be.
Well, we know what to make your headstone out of.
Yes.
All right. From Renew Economy, home battery capacity equals that of pumped hydro in Germany. So speaking of hydropower, a less popular form of hydropower is pumped hydro, which is essentially artificial hydroelectricity. Normally you put up a hydroelectric dam on a river, you collect the water into a lake, and then, you know, you let it through and the turbines produce power. But you can also do that artificially with excess solar power, especially at noon. You pump water from a low area to a high area, and, you know, from maybe a high lake to a low lake.
It's essentially a battery. It's energy storage.
It's essentially a battery, but both, you know, pumped hydro and now home batteries in Germany are getting quite large. And Germany, of course, being very aggressive, they're trying to, you know, hit their targets of clean energy. They're looking for 80% of power demand with renewables by 2030. That's only 6 years from now. And they've got a lot of fossil fuel type stuff on the grid to get rid of. But yeah, so home batteries by the end of this year are expected to be about 6 gigawatts of storage, which is basically what they have in pumped hydro, which, as you say, is also storage. So this is kind of on-demand power that, as long as it's connected to a smart grid, can be drawn upon whenever needed. And, you know, eventually things like people's electric cars that are plugged into a smart grid as well.
Yeah, this is something that most people don't realize, is that it's going to be a transformation. It's not going to be a transition. That there's going to be different ways of doing things in the future with variable renewables ruling the day. And one of those ways is for everybody to have a battery in their home, or lots of people to have a battery in their home, or school buses or trucks that are parked. You know, you can pay people a premium to take their electricity and put it back into the grid when they need it. And it can make a big difference because it's distributed.
Yeah, and
it's not all in one place. It's spread out evenly everywhere.
Yeah, and battery prices, of course, are dropping, and they've dropped a lot this year already. And once battery prices drop, then it becomes much more feasible for, you know, really everybody could have at some point a battery in their home to help keep their home powered when the power's out and to help supply power to the grid when needed.
Now back to some more solar stories. Small-scale solar, good for environment, but agrivoltaics might be better. Now again, agrivoltaics is the intermixing of agricultural land use with solar panels. Sometimes they're over top, high up in a canopy. Sometimes they're in rows of vertical, like in between, so where the harvester goes.
Or fences, you know, just put a fence around your farm.
Yeah, I'm amazed at how much cow fences there are in North America. You can drive for miles, not see a cow, but there's the fence there for the cow should they need to graze there. It's amazing how much land. I'm just blown away by that. But a study conducted at the University of Western Ontario compared both large and small solar installations and concluded that small-scale solar systems are better for the environment than even the largest, most efficient utility-scale projects. Life cycle analysis study compared rooftop solar systems to multi-megawatt utility scale solar PV systems from production to decommissioning. And they found that the rooftop solar systems require 21 to 54% less input energy and make 18 to 59% less carbon. Now, the reason, Brian, why this is because utility scale solar has a lot of iron, a lot of aluminum and steel to mount those suckers into the ground. You know, sometimes they track the sun. So that's where most of this greenhouse gas savings comes from when you're talking about rooftops, because you have basically steel rods, and you mount that to the roof, and then you mount the solar panel to these tracks kind of thing.
Yeah, so less gear needed for something on a roof.
Water used by power plants. I have an infographic here for you, Brian. Coal typically uses, this is gallons per megawatt hour, 1,100 gallons of water for coal. Nuclear is next at 800. After that is natural gas at 300, because remember, you're boiling water to make electricity. You're making steam. And solar, of course, uses none. So that's just a comparison. So the researchers calculated the energy payback time of rooftop solar systems is approximately 51 to 70%, 57% lower than that of ground-mounted systems. So the payback period, that's changing too. Well, the research shows that small rooftop installations are better for the environment. They said a mix of both is needed because there are not enough rooftops to meet electrification needs if we take into account heating and transportation, which are not really on the grid yet, but will be future grid demands, won't they? Water to cool PV systems, Brian? Yes, somebody's trying that. Scientists in Oman have analyzed the effect of soiling, cleaning, and water injection on the performance of PV panels in Oman. PV panels lose efficiency when they get hot, when they hit 25 degrees Celsius, which it's around a little over freezing here where we are. Spring's coming, and our panels now, you'll start to see them taper off in the midday because they're actually getting hot on our roofs.
Yeah.
And it's a lot worse in the desert, obviously, in places like Oman, where they're going to have a chance to cool them. Is it worth it? Well, they have found the use of water for cooling may increase the power yield by up to 23.9% in hot regions. That's a lot, so maybe it's worth it. Maybe it's worth it for you to melt the snow on yours. I don't know. It's a question that they're studying.
And we've talked about solar panels also just mounted on water, just flat and floating on the water. And one of the benefits of that can be is that close contact to the water can help to cool the panels. And again, increase the efficiency through that. Okay, so from Electrek, India. So it's long been rumored that Tesla is thinking about building a factory in India. They're thinking of selling their cars in India, which so far hasn't happened because India has very high tariffs on imported electric vehicles. But there's been rumors for a long time, and we're probably getting close to Tesla announcing some kind of new factory soon at some point. Their next big project will be their cheaper $25,000 car, and something like that would make a lot of sense to sell in India. But they don't have any footprint at all yet in India because of these high tariffs. So there's been talks going on for a long time. There's been rumors. And so the latest is that the government has announced in a press release, the union government has approved a scheme to promote India as a manufacturing destination so that e-vehicles with the latest technology can be manufactured in the country. The policy is designed to attract investments in the e-vehicle space by reputable global EV manufacturers. So they're going to lower to 15% the import duties on EVs valued at $35,000 or above for a period of 5 years. There's some caveats or some requirements that these companies will need to make a minimum investment of $500 million. They will have to set up EV manufacturing in India within 3 years, with the localization level at 25% by the third year and 50% by the fifth year, and limits on the number of units. So taking advantages of this is limited to 40,000 total EVs at the lower tariffs, with no more than 8,000 units per year. So that's the one that seems maybe the stickiest point. Will Tesla go into India with those kind of lower numbers? It's expected that a low-cost vehicle EV would do well in India. They don't sell a lot of higher-cost vehicles in India. So, it's interesting just to see some movement on this. And, India definitely wants EV companies to set up manufacturing in the country. And we'll see if this is the first step to that.
I was watching the start of a documentary, which I didn't finish, called To Kill a Lion? Is that the name? To Kill a Tiger. That is a National Film Board of Canada financed documentary about the rape of a girl in India, in rural India. And it's, I stopped watching it because it was overdubbed, but it was so well overdubbed, I thought it was out of sync that, it was just weird to me. It was like they seemed like they were saying the right things for the lips, but...
Oh, well, they have AI now that can adjust the lips. So I don't know if that's what was going on there now, but they have they have AI that can make the dubbing match better by adjusting the visuals of the lips.
That's, I find that disturbing. I don't know why.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if they did it for a documentary, but...
Well, I switched it to to Hindi and, you know, the audio track, and it was like synced and was subtitles. So I started watching that way, but it was such a disturbing topic that I wasn't in the mood for such a dark topic. But anyway, a lot of the Indian streets are just clogged with 2- and 3-wheel combustion vehicles, right? They're the scooters, the other 3-wheel vehicles, and you know, it's such a ripe area for electrification that they would contribute to the air getting cleaned up. There's other reasons why the air is dirty there, but that's part of it, and certainly noise is a part of it too, that it would help that. So I can't wait till that happens. I think we'll see that, you know, speed up over the next few years. And getting Teslas and other companies in there is important, because this has been a struggle since we started our podcast 4 years ago.
Yeah, and companies like Tesla just haven't gone in because the tariffs are high and their cars are quite expensive. So, you know, it just hasn't been worth it to this point.
Well, let's dip into the mailbag, okay? We've got a couple letters I'm going to skim through here. It says, "Hi, Brian and James. I listened to this radio program on the Indigenous people's perspective of the Thacker Pass lithium mine currently under construction in Nevada. And the show lays out the extremely horrible behavior of the mining company, a Canadian company in this case, and the government officials that the documentary claims have been bought and paid for. And my hope is that the extraction of lithium will lead to the abandonment and hopefully cleanup of many fossil fuel sites that could be returned to the Indigenous people." I recognize I'm probably far too optimistic about that. That's Eric in California. Thanks, Eric.
Yes, I haven't watched the new Scorsese movie yet, Killers of the Flower Moon, but as you've said, and we know that it's around those issues of Indigenous people and oil. And, you know, we have a huge problem really all over the world with oil wells that are just not getting cleaned up. These are toxic sites that the oil and gas companies would just rather not clean up.
And they have no intention of cleaning them up, do they?
They
no.
don't really want to.
They're like a delinquent teenager. Sure, I'll clean up my room, Mom. Just let me screw with it for a while longer.
And, you know, this is one of the reasons that the price of oil and gas should be higher, because often these things like cleaning up the wells is just not taken into account in terms of the prices that we pay.
This is why I say our province, the oil province of Saskatchewan, and our next door, the bigger oil province of Alberta, are going to be wastelands in the future because, A, we're not transitioning, we're not developing economies of clean tech and energy here. And also, when oil does go kaput, and it could be fast because our oil is more expensive here than it is in other parts of the world, they're not going to use ours necessarily. We're going to have all this abandoned infrastructure that we're going to have to pay for. So I have to get out of here. I have to get out of here before I have to pay for that.
Get out before it all collapses.
Our next letter says, "The following was posted on our county's social page, overheard in Leelanau County in Michigan." And it says, "It looks like a copy-paste from some anti-EV website or group. No sources were cited." I'd be very interested to hear you guys' take on this. I found myself, James here, I found that was originally posted 3 years ago or so. I found one case of it being posted. Yeah, this is... It's stupid, Brian. But, you know, when this stuff goes around, I actually contacted the listener and asked him if he thought any of it was real. And he said, no. I wrote back. He says, I believe, he says he didn't believe it. And he says, no, it smelled like BS, but I wanted to know you guys' thoughts.
Yeah, so this is a paragraph here that this basically claims that the, you know, footprint of an EV is worse than a gas car because it takes 12 tons of rock for lithium, 5 tons of cobalt, all of these things. And you know, there is a carbon footprint to electric vehicles, but, you know, there's just no doubt about it. We're going to need electric vehicles. We need to stop burning fossil fuels. And while EVs are not perfect, there's still a carbon footprint to them. It is absolutely far, far less than the carbon footprint for gas cars, which just keep churning out exhaust every year that they operate.
Yeah, and it's this is from Phil, by the way, in Michigan, and I feel for you. My Facebook feed is sort of customized not to see this crap, but I know it's getting passed around. I see it on the local EV groups. People talk about it. it's just it's just such nonsense. It's not even like the life is one thing here that stood out is the life expectancy of the battery is 10 years average. It'll take 7 years to pay for it. Well, the 7 years part is true. It will take 7 years to become carbon neutral. But then
often there is a hint of truth in all these things. And like I say, there is a carbon footprint to electric cars. So,
but you know, I've got the worst battery in history on my Leaf, and it is 11 years and counting. And there's no reason why it's just going to expire in 10 years. Why would someone spend $100,000 or $40,000 on a car that expires in 10 years? You know, give yourself a kick in the butt, people. If you're these people who pass this, I mean, everybody believes it because it's negative. And, you know, there's all these facts in it. So therefore, wow, I'm going to just share that. And it's crap. I mean, if you buy a pencil, there is some mining involved, you know? There's a carbon footprint to that pencil. There's everything you buy. But do I see these people say, well, what about the carbon footprint of my Ford F-150? I mean, stuff had to be mined for that. Am I thinking about that? They don't give a crap about whales, you know, with the wind farms that they claim that whales are being affected by, which they're not. You know, these people are not environmentalists in any way, but they're suddenly claiming to be, that EVs are terrible for the environment. And they also, there's also the assumption on these things that if people buy EVs for the environment, and it's hard to say this, but the number one motivating factor to make that decision is because it's a damn cool thing that you want to have. It's a cool product. It's a better product. Living with an EV for 95% of people, if it meets your needs and you know what you're doing, is a better experience. I love not going to gas stations. Love it. I don't love paying more for car washes because I'm a cheap bastard. I wish I, you know, if anyone wants to buy me a car wash
for the fill up. Yeah.
They charge $3 extra or something like that for car washes unless you get the fill up. They should do it if you charge. They should just give it. That shouldn't be that way. It's wrong.
But yeah, there is a phenomenon of how a pessimist can often sound smarter. And I'm not sure, and I believe this has been researched. I think I read an article one time, but, you know, comparing an optimist to a pessimist, there's just something about spouting the pessimism that can make you sound smart.
And of course, they mentioned that the batteries are $5,000 for this and $14,000 for that, with the assumption that, you know, the batteries have to be replaced. They're not your laptop. It's different. And we've talked about it on the show. I'm not going to repeat it this time, but a great deal of effort goes into these things to last longer than the car. And even if your car is salvaged at like 23 years, which is like, it'll still have 70% of the battery in a Tesla. And that car, you know, if it's still running, if it's still not rusted out, you can sell it to a teenager 23 years from now, and they'll drive it around shorter distances. They don't care. The battery also does not get thrown in the trash. It is not given away. It is sold for, you know, at least $1,000 to salvage people who will then turn it into something else or take the modules to fix other cars that are in good shape. You know, it's just, you don't throw $1,000 bills in the landfill. You just don't do that. That's why you don't, if you go to a landfill, you won't see a lot of $1,000 bills there. It's because, you know, obviously. Here's the thing to do. Google the term EV myths if you want to know, because you're not going to get misinformation because people will not claim that they're myths. So you'll get studies, and you can spend all day on this if you want to. I can't do it here. It's exhausting to constantly bust myths. We do our best to add it into the show every once in a while, and when we hear from listeners, we know what they're interested in, and as we come across it in the future, we'll delve into it.
No, and when somebody shares this stuff, the feeling then is to just, oh, let's do nothing. And that's, of course, the worst thing. We all have to be doing something. This is a transition. It's going to happen anyway. And, you know, if it happens faster, that's better.
And there's, you know, stories out there where they're saying that, you know, the fossil fuel industry is behind these stories. So they help spread it, and sometimes
absolutely.
they write the suckers, and it's frustrating. So let's get back to my solar stories. This is part 3 now. Scientists in Austria have conducted a life cycle assessment of vertical bifacial agrivoltaic systems. Brian, that caffeine I had this morning allowed me to say that without stumbling. I just want to thank my caffeine. and stilted agrivoltaic facilities. Their analysis revealed that vertical installations have lower environmental impacts in a wide range of scenarios. So they're finding that, yeah, if you do agrivoltaics, vertical is better for the environment. Chinese solar manufacturer Longji has developed a new anti-dust module for the commercial and industrial market in Australia. Lots of dust in Australia. The frame sits flush against the glass on the short side and allows the water to wash off the dust. Just a little tweak. Hurricane-resistant hybrid solar plant inaugurated on Antigua and Barbados. The hybrid solar and battery project is funded by 50 million UAE Caribbean Renewable Energy Fund, and it's giving 720 kilowatt output of solar panels that are resistant to hurricanes. They're not going to have to worry about it when the hurricane comes next, that the solar panels are going to be hurricane resistant. And that's something they can do, something they study, something they learn from, because solar panels in mass haven't been around for all that long.
Yeah, I worry about my solar panels when the wind gets really high, as it often does here, but so far they have not blown off my roof.
Austrian startup offers standardized system for a solar bike road. And again, can't show you the picture, but it's just an idea of a bike path covered in solar. They have the modules for this that are 12 meters long, these structures, and you can put them in without, the need for concrete, because you can just anchor them into the ground with screw pilings or something like that. No excavation. And you can put solar along and shade it if you're in a hot climate, or even keep rain off you if you're in a wet climate and you want to have people commute to work and not deal with the elements as much. Cool idea. And it's not going to solve climate change, but it's just an interesting application, and I like to see stuff like that. And here's another one: dynamic photovoltaic blinds for glazed facade buildings. For large buildings with lots of glass facing south, scientists in China have built blinds for your window that reportedly not only regulate the thermal load, the daylight penetration, but it'll increase the energy generation by producing some power. European roads, rails may host up to 403 gigawatts. That's like 400 nuclear power plants worth of vertical PV. This is a study that said in Europe there's enough room on the sides of roads and railway lines to put vertical PV and have the equivalent of 400 nuclear power plants at peak, at midday on a sunny day. Not all the time, but that's a lot of power, and that's, again, not using any more land. U.S. solar sites linked to higher levels of insects. This is good news because it means that nature is doing well when solar panels are installed. The insects are coming back, and they've when they're built on rehabilitated agricultural land, the findings show how habitat-friendly solar could help protect insect populations and improve pollination, which we all love, because we like it when things are pollinized and we can eat them and be happy. So that's my last of my solar stories until the lightning round.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, moving on to hydrogen. This is from Hydrogen Insight, and I wanted to talk about this because we spoke of this a long time ago when this was just opening up. So they have a hydrogen-only rail line in Germany, but unfortunately, it hasn't worked that well. They've had a lot of problems with it. So they're going to offer free travel to all passengers throughout April and May. So if we have any of our listeners in Germany, the RB15 line in the Frankfurt region, free train travel through April and May. And it's because they saw 19% of their trains canceled in 2023 because this is new technology. Unfortunately, it didn't work that well. Ulrich Krebs, the chairman of the supervisory board, admitted the start of the hydrogen trains was a complete failure. That's what he said.
Oh, dear. Well, if you are a listener and you're going to go on one of those trains, why don't you start recording something and say, hi, this is so-and-so. I'm on a hydrogen train. You know,
Yeah.
we'll use your audio on the show.
Also, unrelated, some of them had non-functioning toilets, not related to the hydrogen power. But, building trains is difficult. And, sometimes even the toilets don't work. It's, it's a big deal.
That would be a problem.
Yeah, this first hydrogen rail line was launched in August 2022. But the state-owned organization that does the trains has decided that it will replace the remainder of its diesel trains with cheaper to operate battery electric models. Now, I don't know anything about hydrogen engineering, but it does seem more complicated than battery electric. We kind of all know how batteries work, and I don't think trains are a particularly bad situation for battery electric. You could have a whole car that was just nothing but batteries. Weight doesn't matter so much on a train. So, yeah, that was always my question with things like, hydrogen-powered trains. Why not just go battery electric? And it sounds like this is what they're going to do as they continue with this in Germany.
I predict we'll see more battery electric trains in the future, because as battery prices go down and the energy density goes up, we'll see that happen more often. It's time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy and transportation.
The April total eclipse to impact solar generation from Mexico to New England. And a new weekly update for PV Magazine, Solcast reports that on April 8th, a total eclipse will pass from Mexico across Texas and up the East Coast through Montreal, and with most of the continental U.S. experiencing a significant drop in solar generation.
So, James, does this mean we should give up with solar power?
That means it's pointless, Brian. Every 500 years there's an eclipse. Yeah, there was an eclipse 3 years ago, and I wanted to go to Casper, Wyoming to see it, and my family didn't all agree, and I said it's a once-in-a-lifetime chance, and I thought, okay, well, it's all right. I'll be rich by the next one, which is now. Guess what? Not rich.
Oh, well.
Not rich. Areas in the totality where the moon completely blocks the sun will see 100% loss of solar generation, not surprising for the duration of the totality. However, the overall effects of the eclipse will cost up to 16% of daily total clear sky irradiance in most areas affected. So yeah, you're going to have less solar power in it, but they know that.
Yeah, the utilities know this, so they can plan for this, and it shouldn't be a problem.
A nationwide analysis by USA Today shows that local governments are banning green power faster than they are building it. So this is a problem. This gets back to rural places where we live. This is sent in by Ryan in Virginia, wanted us to cover this story. So it's USA Today. Just the issue that there's this growing rural, not in my backyard for anything. And apparently there's more governments banning green power than they're building it. And that is not good. And that's what they're doing in Alberta. It's just not good. It's not good for your economy. You're throwing away money.
You can't stop it. Clean energy is cheaper. It's better. You can't stop it. This just slows it down perhaps slightly.
U.S. researchers are testing dual-use solar snow fence. We're talking about solar fences before. Well, how about a solar snow fence? A snow fence is usually a slatted temporary fence that is put up to stop snow from drifting onto roads and other things like that. Well, they've got a product here that is slatted like that. It's not a solid solar panel, but the slats are solar and they make electricity.
Yeah, so snow fences, they're not solid fences. They always have gaps in them. It's just to kind of control the snow drifts, I guess. But why not make the slats solar? And I guess someone has done that.
So these regions, they often build snow fencing along the roads to block the drifts from accumulating. And North Dakota State University and Minnesota Department of Transportation are evaluating adding solar panels to the snow fencing. They're doing some tests to see if it's worthwhile. Adding a dual benefit of clean energy production to an already developed space. The 6-inch wide solar panels are there with spaces in between, as you said, and the fence functions by blocking snowdrifts. A 100-foot section of the fence can produce around 20 to 30 kilowatt hours per kilowatts per hour during the daytime in the northern climate when it's facing south, I guess. The use of new energy vehicles accounts for 77.6% of China's public transport system, a government official said on Friday. So, yeah, it's all clean energy now for China's, public transport system, clean energy, electricity.
They're moving very, very quickly on their public transport system in China.
The Australian city of Coburn is to call for a blanket ban on dark-colored roofing materials. This will reduce energy used for cooling and lower the heat island effect on cities. Australia's EV sales skyrocketed to 120% from last year. That's more than doubling, Brian. Australia's catching up. They were a bit behind.
EVs
now
are taking off.
They're quickly catching up. And that's something that Tony Seba says, if something goes slow, it's still going to catch up fast eventually because of what's going on. Shell plans to divest, that is sell, 1,000 retail sites in a shift to EV charging. Shell plans to sell 1,000 retail sites over the next 2 years, responding to a growing demand for electric vehicles. Quote, we are upgrading our retail network with expanded electric vehicle charging and convenience offers in response to changing customer needs. They claim they are going to make about 12% of this investment. Basically, they're having, I think they're having sites that are EV-centric that can, give the convenience of food and stuff that people who are charging for longer periods of time. However, I still think it's going to get down to about 9 minutes 10 years from now or sooner. And, basically have a clean toilet and a cup of coffee and you're gone. You're not going to sit there for a meal if you don't have to.
Yeah, no, we've talked about how these EV stations are going to look in the future. And yeah, right now you need lots of time for food and bathrooms and stuff. But as charging speeds speed up, maybe not such a great business for that.
NIO launches a new 75 kilowatt hour battery pack that's using only LFP batteries. This is, usually they're smaller. So this is a bigger pack that's going to just be, it was a hybrid before, it was a mixture of the two different kinds, the high density and the low density, but now they've got it down to this. And plus, the charging time is dropping from 30 minutes to 27, 10 to 80% in a vehicle. Denmark's biggest bank, one of the 60th largest in the world, is no longer going to do business with fossil fuel expanders. That is, companies that are expanding the mining and use of fossil fuels, no longer doing business. I'd like to see more of that. Jeff Bezos' fund will put $60 million into improving alternative meat as a part of a push to make food more sustainable. $60 million, Jeff, that's not enough. That's pocket change.
Yeah,
that's what you would tip at a restaurant if you were going to a restaurant.
You can afford it.
And finally this week, and it's a tweet of the week. This again is from Okstra. Grid congestion is the bottleneck for economic growth and sustainability in the Netherlands, but it doesn't have to be. When we combine dynamic line rating with peak shaving, we could move 3 times more electricity with the current grid. For less than $10 billion, we could unlock 30% more capacity from our grid, and that's in Europe. What is peak shaving? Peak shaving means that you take measures to lower the peaks in electricity usage. Peaks are often what limits the use of a power line. In the example that they gave, demand was too high for a few hours per week, but only a few hours per week. So what do? They shave off that peak, and then they can increase the rest of the time that the power going through it the rest of the time. There's more than enough capacity overall. Adjusting only 2.5% of electricity demand that causes the biggest peak adds 25% of capacity on those lines. Removing 17% of the energy from the peaks, like with dynamic pricing, batteries, smart charging, etc., that provides 50% more capacity. Current grid operators use static line rating, SLR, which means that they use one number for the amount of electricity that a power line can carry. But in reality, it's the heat that is the limiting factor on that power line. So the max power is different for each point in time, but now if we add dynamic line rating, things start to change. So if you start to say, it's cold out, so we could put more electricity through, or if we reduce the electricity to cool down the lines temporarily, overall, you're getting a lot more on that same grid without building a new grid. You can still, right now, today, without building new, start to get more energy out of that grid, maybe even 3 times as much.
Yeah, we will need to be smarter about our grid in the future as demand increases through things like electric vehicles. All right, that's our show for this week. Please take the time to contact us at cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. And around social media, you can find us as Clean Energy Pod.
And you can find video of our show on TikTok and YouTube, including special content not featured here on the podcast. Have a look at the Clean Energy store for merch. The link is in your show notes. If you're new to the show, remember to subscribe on your podcast app to get new episodes delivered every week.
See you next week.
The Clean Energy Show.